Okay, welcome to another evening of Dine Learn, Summer Tufshin Ayin Vav. Shkoch again to Moshe Holzer for arranging this, and tonight Shkoch to the Shuali family for sponsoring the delicious dinner. Luli Nishmas, Harry's father, Mordechai ben Rav Yitzchak, Shem should have an aliyah. So we're learning Hilchos Yesodei Torah Perek Zayin about Nevuah. So Nevuah is not like watching a YouTube video. A few differences. One is YouTube videos, you just sit back, you watch it. Usually you have at least one other screen on, you're texting, you probably have some food in another hand and you're eating. There's a lot of things going on when you're watching a YouTube video. Nevuah is not like that at all. And a YouTube video, obviously you're watching through your eyes. There's a physical element to watching it. While a Nevuah is completely the exact opposite. There's no physical aspect whatsoever. There's nothing else going on. In fact, your body is totally distracted through physical pain to release your mind from the physicality. So it's purely a spiritual, intellectual experience, as opposed to watching a YouTube video, which very often has no intellectual experience whatsoever. So you see this in the Rambam in Halacha Beis, 3 lines down. V'kulan kishemis abim, all of them, any Navi, when they have a Nevuah, except for Moshe Rabbeinu, Evrehen mizdazin, their limbs shake. The koach haguf koshel, and their physical body, their physical strength weakens. And why? Veshnoseya mitzdarfos. Why? Vetishar hadas pinuya, so that the mind is free. Lahavin mashatira. There's no distractions whatsoever, no physical distractions. It's somewhat reminiscent of people who meditate, to remove themselves, their brains from the physical body. And the Rambam's son was very into meditation, apparently. But be that as it may, this doesn't sound like a meditation that I've heard of where you're in physical pain. And if you remember from a few weeks ago, that Khilah Yitzchak even suggests, why does a Navi have to be mighty, strong, a Gibor? Not like the Rambam said that it really relates to your midos. The Khilah Yitzchak said because Nevuah is physically challenging, and Hashem wouldn't give that challenge to someone who cannot withstand it. You don't want someone, like they say on a roller coaster. If you have a heart condition, don't even get on. So too with Nevuah. If you have a heart condition, Hashem's not even gonna start with you. So if we go to Halacha Gimel, so Nevuah is not a brain teaser. It's not a puzzle. In World War II, when the British were trying to recruit code breakers to break through the Nazi codes, so the way they did it was that they put in I don't think it was a word jumble, some sort of a difficult puzzle in the newspapers, and they said, if you can solve it, send it back to us, we'll give you a prize. So anyone who solved it and sent it back was invited for an interview, an audition, which they didn't even know it was, and from there they got their top code breakers if you could solve this puzzle, because to solve a code, you got to be clever. You got to figure out what the things mean. Nevuah is not like that at all. It seems like it to us. When we learn Yirmiyahu, we break our teeth trying to figure out what Yirmiyahu is talking about. But Yirmiyahu himself, when he got that from Hashem, he knew exactly what it meant. The Rambam says this in Halacha Gimel, Hadvarim shemodim leNavi b'mare haNevuah, anything that the Navi gets from Hashem in the Nevuah, derech mashal modin lo. It's told to him as a parable. It's like a symbolic allegory story that is not straight to the point. It expresses the point vividly. Umiyad yechakek belibo pisran hamashal. But immediately is placed in him also the explanation. There's no guesswork involved on behalf of the Navi. He doesn't have to interpret it. He knows exactly what it means. B'mare haNevuah. In that very Nevuah, he gets not only the allegory, he gets the explanation. V'yeda mahu. And he'll know exactly what it is. So there's a poem by Robert Frost. I don't remember the exact name. I'm not really into the whole literature thing. But I vaguely remember about a man going to a forest and it's snowing at the woods. He's watching the snow, and then he realizes at the end of the poem he has to go on because he has many miles to go before he goes to sleep. So it's a simple poem, but there's depth in there. And the commentaries on the poems, they explain that really it means that in life you can't stop and you got to stop and enjoy a little bit, but you got to keep going because you have a lot to accomplish. And some people go a little deeper. They say, what's the snow? It's beautiful, so you can be distracted by the beauties of life and all the temptations. all the wonderful things in life, but you can't do that. You got to keep going, and if you want to accomplish anything in life, you can't spend your time just enjoying yourself. You got to actually accomplish. And some see a little darkness there. The wood symbolize some sort of treachery, darkness, demons, bad things going on. So you could be tempted to go towards the dark side and do bad things, but that's not really what you should do. You should keep going, and you have many miles to travel to accomplish good things in life, and you should avoid the bad things. So, which is true? I don't know, but there are many different interpretations, many different levels. There's a movie from like 30 years ago, which is it's a classic. This particular scene is a classic that they talk about a lot. Someone who was an older man, was a rich older man, was in college. He went back to college, and he had to write a paper on Vonnegut, Kurt Vonnegut's books. Vonnegut was alive at the time, so he paid Vonnegut to write his term paper for him. And he handed it in, and he gets it back, and he fails. And he gives it back to Vonnegut and says, "You don't know anything about Vonnegut." Right? So the idea is that interpretation, when someone writes something and puts it out in the public, it has a life of its own. People can interpret it. You might even not realize what you wrote and the depths that it is. You might actually be a very superficial person. But people see depth in your very simple ideas. Nevuah is the exact opposite. A Navi knows every detail, every level of understanding that's out there. We might not know it. We're not the Navi. But in the Nevuahs, most of the Nevuahs themselves actually explain what it means. So when it comes to Nevuah, it doesn't have a life of its own. It means what it means, whatever the Navi knows from Hashem that it means. And we have no right to interpret it beyond what we think it actually means. Now, we're not the Navi, so there's some guesswork involved. And if you look in the commentaries, there are many different explanations. They might all be true. There might be different levels of explanation. They might not all be true. So the Rambam continues. He gives some examples, and these are a little bit surprising. Kimo Hasulam Shira Yaakov Avinu. Yaakov Avinu had this dream. He saw the ladder going up, and he knew immediately what it meant. And the Rambam is going to tell us immediately what it meant. So what did that ladder that Yaakov Avinu saw in his dream? Right, Malachim Olim veYardim bo. There are angels going up and angels coming down. V'hu hayamashal lamalchios veshibudan. This was a parable, an allegory to the nations, and who will be in charge when. So malachim is 2, right? So the minimum amount of plural, we know it's plural, so the minimum amount of plural is 2, and there are malachim going up, malachim going down, so 2 plus 2 is 4, so there are 4 kingdoms. Who gave a nevuah about 4 kingdoms later on in Tanakh? Daniel. So the Rambam is saying that the malachim that Yaakov Avinu saw on his ladder refers to the 4 kingdoms that Daniel prophesied about. So actually, the Rambam got this from Midrash Rabbah, from Bereshit Rabbah, and the Bereshit Rabbah has many different explanations, and he chose that one by, I think, Rabbi Gil ben Levi, and he says, that's pshat. I don't know, he seems to be paskening like that explanation. The irony is, in the Mar Nevuchim, in many places, the Rambam quotes this nevuah of the ladder and gives a totally different explanation. He said, what do you see in the ladder and the malachim going up and down? That there are many different levels in Shamayim. So a totally different explanation that it's really talking about malachim, and there are different types of malachim, different types of, and how do you connect our world to the world, the heavenly world? That's what the Sulam is talking about. So how do you explain the Rambam? It's a contradiction. Here he paskins like Rabbi Gil ben Levi, and the Mar Nevuchim gives a totally different explanation. I think the simple answer is they're all true. There are many different levels to a nevuah and many different levels of explanation, and these 2 at least are true, and there are others that might also be true also. And that gives permission to us to give other explanations. And the Rishonim and the Midrashim give many different explanations because we don't actually know what the nevuah meant. We're not the Navi himself. So that's one example. Yaakov Avinu. Ukmo hachayos shera'a Yechezkel. Yechezkel saw the chayos, right? The beings, the celestial beings, the heavenly beings with 4 different faces on them. The Rambam doesn't say what that means. V'hasir nafuach. So Yirmiyahu saw a boiling pot. So the first parak of Yirmiyahu, and it was open facing to the north. And he tells us what it means. It means mitzafon tiposach hara'ah. Evil, the bad, the conquerors are coming from the north. Because the boiling pot symbolized the conquerors. Okay, so that we know. We know what that means. And that is the pshat. The Navi tells us this is what it means. We have no right to go beyond that. V'hamegillah, umakel shaked shara Yirmiyah, and Yirmiyah saw a branch from an almond tree, and an almond tree shakel. And the Navi himself, Yirmiyah himself, tells us what it means. It means that the Nevuah will come true very quickly, and he's saying the conqueror, Yerushalayim, will be destroyed very quickly. That's what the Navi says, and that's what it means. V'hamegillah shara Yechezkel. Yechezkel saw a Megillah. He had a Nevuah that he ate a Megillah. I don't think the Rambam believes he actually ate the Megillah. So in the Nevuah, Yechezkel. I'm sorry. So when I was a kid, I ate paper also. It was not very very filling meal. No offense. So that means, and that would symbolize that the Navi will know exactly. He'll have the knowledge directly inside him and have it at his fingertips. Ve'ha'efa shira Zechariah, and Zechariah saw this measure, and the Navi tells us. Zechariah tells us what it means. It means the measuring block that people were cheating when measuring in their business. So these Navim, clearly, they received the explanation of what the Nevuah meant, and then they told us. V'chein shar ha'nevim, and all the other Navim, they all got the explanation. Mehem omrim hamashal upisrono kamo elu. Some of them told us the mashal and the explanation. V'yeshen omrim hapisron bilvad, and some only told us the explanation. Upamim omrim hamashal bilvad, and sometimes they only tell us the mashal below pisron. But they don't give us the explanation. Why? Because I assume it's like some of those school books. You get homework. Some of them, they give you the answer keys, and they say the rest is for your exercise. The Navi expected us at some point to be able to figure it out on our own. Kimixas divrei Yechezkel, like some of the things Yechezkel said, it was Zechariah, and Zechariah also, v'kulan b'mashal. They were all given to them as a mashal, v'derechida, and as a puzzle, hem misnabim. That's how the Nevuah came. And you can see in Zechariah, the Rambam doesn't say it here, in more Nevuchim it says, you can see in Zechariah, you can see in Daniel, they got this mashal, they didn't know what it means, and in the Nevuah they say, please explain to me what it means. And then in the Nevuah, they get the explanation. And so the Rambam learns from there that every Nevuah, they got the mashal and they got the explanation. Sometimes they told us, sometimes they left it as an exercise to the reader to figure out what it means. Interestingly, the Abarbanel, in his introduction to Yirmiyahu, talks about this. It says something shocking. The Abarbanel says, Yirmiyahu was such a great Navi, he was almost at the level of Moshe Rabbeinu. That's how great a Navi he was. But he was not a very good speaker and not a very good writer. And that's why in Yirmiyahu you see all sorts of grammatical errors, and sometimes he seems to be reaching for a word and gives the wrong word.
Is that a critique on Yirmiyahu, per se, that or flaw that when you see he's not a writer? Who makes that observation that he's not a good writer?
So you could see it as a critique. So similarly, Professor Chaim Soloveitchik, the son of Rabbi Yoshe Ber, so when he writes about Rabbeinu Tam, and if you ever learn Sefer HaYashar by Rabbeinu Tam, it's very hard to figure out what it means. The sentences don't seem to be complete sentences. So the way Dr. Soloveitchik says it is that Rabbeinu Tam's mind was so fast, it was faster than he could write. And he was such a great thinker. So I wouldn't say such a thing. Maybe he didn't write it himself. Maybe he just wrote it as notes and he never finished it. I don't know. It's very hard to say something like that. And to say that about Yirmiyahu, so the Malbim in his introduction, which I have here, he's scandalized. How could you say such a thing about Yirmiyahu, about a Navi? The Malbim says if the Abarbanel thought he had bad grammar or bad word choice, it's because the Abarbanel didn't understand what Yirmiyahu was really trying to say. And so the Malbim says, learn my parish and you'll understand. If only the Abarbanel had the parish of Malbim, he wouldn't have said such a thing. But the Malbim says more. He quotes the Rambam here. He quotes the Rambam in two places. So he quotes the Rambam in the Moreh Nevuchim that we said before, a few weeks ago, that remember there are three views on what Nevuah is. One is that it's entirely a miracle. Anyone, even a frog or a donkey, can get Nevuah. The Rambam doesn't like that. Then there's the philosopher's opinion that Nevuah is purely natural. Anyone who reaches this state of spiritual and intellectual perfection automatically gets Nevuah. The Rambam didn't like that either. The Rambam says there are two ways to learn it, but the way we were explaining it, that Nevuah is you have to reach a certain place of intellectual place, but human beings cannot reach Hashem. And we need that miracle from Hashem to take us that extra level. So the Malbim says, so what's going to happen here? Hashem is going to reach out to a Navi, take him miraculously up to the state where he gets a Nevuah, but he's not going to give him the words to say so that anyone else can understand it. That doesn't sound like such a great miracle. If Hashem's going to do a miracle, do it right, and give the Navi the words to say so that he could actually fulfill his mission, which there's a miracle to do. The whole miracle is so he could do his mission, so do the miracle. So he quotes Chazal who say that every Navi spoke in different words. Each Navi had his own way of saying things. So the Malbim says, so there are two possible explanations why each Navi had his own way of saying things. Why? If you learn Yeshayahu uses very, very difficult language. It's one of the hardest when you're trying to translate. If you don't have an English translation next to you, when you're trying to translate Yeshayahu and Eov, I think are the two hardest svarim in Tanakh. Maybe Daniel if you don't know Aramaic. So Aramaic is harder than Hebrew. But if you're just trying to translate, Yeshayahu is very, very difficult. Yirmiyahu is not nearly as difficult in terms of the words that he chooses. So if Hashem is giving it to each Navi, so why does he change the style? So the Malbim says either two possible explanations. Number one, it depends on the intellect of the person. Everything. The Rambam has been saying, everything we've been talking about the past few weeks. The person's midos, whether he gets angry in rare times, or he's a little gaivadik, or he likes the women, whatever it is, like Shlomo. So that affects the level of nevuah and the type of nevuah that he gets. So that also affects the wording that he gets. Depending on who he is and everything about him, that determines what Hashem gives him. So too here, we just saw the Rambam said Hashem gives him the mashal, and he gives him the answers, and says the Malbim, and he gives him the actual words to say, which makes sense. Why we can learn halachas from a nevuah. Because if it's just a Navi saying his own words, that doesn't have the same power. And especially when the Rambam was talking about Ruach HaKodesh, right? The lowest level is when you have Hatzlacha and you're able to save people and to do a mitzvah with unusual strength, superhuman strength. It's the first level of Ruach HaKodesh. Second level of Ruach HaKodesh is that Hashem moves you to write certain things. So if it's just your own words, what's that Ruach HaKodesh do? So this is even a higher level. So Hashem not only gives you the answer, he gives you the words to say. That's how the Malbim is learning this Rambam. Okay, let's go on to the next halacha, which is super important. I think answers a lot of questions a lot of people have. So the Rambam says, "Kol neviim ein misnabim b'chol eish yirtzu." It's halacha daled. You don't get a nevuah anytime that you want it, except for Moshe Rabbeinu. Ela mechavnim da'atam. They have to pay attention. They have to prepare themselves. V'yoshvim smeichim v'tovei leiv umizbodedim. They sit down. They're happy. And they sit by themselves and they meditate. Or they think. They prepare themselves intellectually and spiritually. They're happy. Happy. That's the key. She'ena nevuah shora lo mitoch atzvus velo mitoch atzlus. Nevuah does not come on you if you're sad. He says atzlus we think of as laziness, but he means more like you're languid. You can't really move around much. You're depressed. Ela mitoch simcha. Only by being happy. Lefichach bnei hanevim lefneihem nevel v'tov v'chalil v'chinor. Therefore, the bnei nevim, the neviim who were trying to get nevuah, they would have musicians playing for them. They had their little iPods, and then they would get them in the mood. V'hem mevakshim hanevuah, and that's part of their process of reaching nevuah. V'zeu shenemar, and this is what the pasuk says. V'hem misabim, they're trying to reach nevuah. Kolomer. Right, this is in Shmuel Aleph, talking about Shaul. Kolomer mehalchim b'derech hanevuah. They're going in the path of nevuah. Ad she'yinabu. Until they reach, you have to, it's a process. You have to gain, and we talked about this. K'mosha ta'omer ploni misgadel. Like you're saying, someone is trying to be great, be big, so they were trying to become neviim. You have to be happy. So, questions are, so should we go to, turn on Comedy Central if we want to get nevuah? I don't think that would work. I really don't think that would go to a kosher comedian. So no. So the Rambam doesn't quote the whole language of the Gemara here. I neglected to bring the Gemara. The Gemara talks about different types of happiness that don't work. Not schok, not kalas rosh. But the Gemara says, simcha shel mitzvah. So Simcha shel mitzvah. It seems clear the Rambam didn't have those last two words, shel mitzvah. And Rav Yosef Kafach in his footnotes thinks that was just a copyist mistake in our Gemaras. So it says simcha shel mitzvah. But the intent is right. Kosher simcha. You're supposed to have a simcha that comes from reaching out to Hashem, not a simcha that comes from being distracted from Hashem. That's the exact opposite of Nevuah. If you don't want Nevuah, go to hear a comedian, because that'll distract you from what's important in life and what's true in life. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with reading a Mordechai Schmutter book. You know, I'm the one who brought him to our annual dinner. There's nothing wrong with having a little fun, but that's not the way to aspire and to reach higher levels of Yiddishkeit. That's the way to take a load off and just relax.
Does that mean giving? On the flip side, does that mean giving and listening to Nevuah is a mitzvah in itself, like learning Torah, or
meaning getting a Nevuah, becoming a Navi? Is it a mitzvah? I don't think so. I think it's a privilege. It's an opportunity. I mean, all mitzvahs are privileges and opportunity, but there's no requirement to do that. It's just, if you had that possibility, how could you turn it down?
Right, because you effectively you're giving Musar an inspiration.
So Rabbeinu Yonah says, if you have the opportunity to do tshuva, and you don't do tshuva, that's a big avera. That's why he says we're heading up to Elul, so in the Seres Yemei Tshuva, Dirshu Hashem Behi Matzo, that's coming up. No, that was the Haftarah yesterday. So that means Hashem is waiting for us to do tshuva during the Seres Yemei Tshuva, and if in that time you don't do tshuva, that's already a big avera, because you have the opportunity, you don't take advantage of it. So I heard Mordechai Willig say that about tefillah also, that you're in the shul and you have the opportunity to daven and you don't daven. You have the opportunity to daven with kavanah and you don't. So too, that's also a big avera. If you have the opportunity, you don't take it. So then that's just similar to not doing tshuva. And so too, if you have the opportunity to get nevuah and you just say, not for me. So that's not a good thing. When I was in third grade, total sidetrack, there was an election year, and our teacher was asking us, certain people, to choose a candidate and to give a report to the class about the candidate. So she asked me, privilege, to choose a candidate, Reagan, Carter, Anderson, those were the three, and I could give a report to the class. And I said, I really want to play during recess. No, thank you. I got in so much trouble for that. Because when you have an opportunity and you say, no, thank you, that's not the right answer to give. When Hashem offers you nevuah, you don't say, no, thank you. But it doesn't mean it's a requirement to get to the point where, because,
Does that stem from when Rosh Rabbeinu refused to speak when Kadosh Baruch Hu was saying to him, go lead, go say, but who am I? I'm a man of few words and stuff like that. And Kadosh Baruch Hu said, you're Knasir? I
once had a Christian colleague. He was more of it's not so religious, but he was very into the classics, and he was reading the Bible for the first time, and he comes to me and said, I just read the beginning of Exodus, and I see Moses talking to God and saying, I really don't want to be your messenger. And it seemed to him that it was all comedy. And I said, no, he actually meant it. Because if you think about it, we learn Parsha every week, right? We've been learning this since we were kids. But if you come in from the outside, it's ridiculous. If God comes to you and says, I have a message for you, you don't say, no, thank you. That's exactly what you're saying. It's ridiculous. And Moshe Rabbeinu had to do it, right? And then Hashem says, okay, Aaron could be your messenger.
If you think you're unfit, is there anything wrong with rejecting that? Like when you're offered an aliyah, you're not allowed to reject it. But if someone asks you to be the Shliach Tzibur and you actually you're not fit to be the Shliach Tzibur.
If you can't, but if God is asking you, so he kind of knows better than you, right? So if it's the Gabbai, so the Gabbai doesn't necessarily know whether you're ready or not. He doesn't know whether you have a cold or not, you have a sore throat. Hashem knows. If Hashem is going to Moshe Rabbeinu and saying, you're my Shaliach, and Moshe Rabbeinu says, I don't think so, it does seem weird. But I don't know if he got punished for that. Did he get punished for that?
I thought he got punished. It's a Keshem Parma. It was a design, put it that way.
Right. So this Rambam, people ask the Kasha. The Gemara says, and I think we've quoted it before, there's no Nevuah except in Eretz Yisrael. And there's no Nevuah, the Gemara says in Bava Basra, there's no Nevuah after the Churban. It's Machlokes, Midrashim. Is it after the first Churban? Is it after they built the second bayis? So it's like 70 years different. Is it just a few years into the second bayis? So the different Midrashim, exactly how you answer that, doesn't really matter. Bizman Hazeh, there's no Nevuah. In the time of the Gemara, there's no Nevuah, especially if you're not in Eretz Yisrael. So why did Yonah, when he got the Nevuah, why did he run away? So Rashi says, because he wanted to get out of Eretz Yisrael so he wouldn't get the Nevuah. So why did Yechezkel get Nevuah when he was in Bavel? Okay, it's a kasha. They asked the kasha, and the answer is he already had the Nevuah. Their answers. Chagai, Zachariah, and Malachi, they were right at the end of Trei Asar. They were the last Nevi'im. We quoted Malachi last week. He was the last Navi. So they were ready after the Chorban. So they say they already had the Nevuahs. Yirmiyahu already had their Nevuahs, and he passed it on to them, something like that. Exactly how I explain it. But after that time period, no Nevuah. Outside of Eretz Yisrael, no Nevuah. We're learning the Rambam, Hilchos Nevuah. He doesn't mention it at all. So they say, what does that mean? So there's one professor who wrote a whole article trying to prove the Rambam thought he was a Navi. And it's right. To me, I read it, I cracked up. He says, so in one of the letters, the Rambam starts off saying, I'm not a Navi, but here's what I think. So he said, he said he's not a Navi. What was the Hava Mina? That he is a Navi, and he really believed he is a Navi. It is Narishkeit, I think.
The people did not the Mashiach, they sort of implying that they were the Mashiach?
According to this professor, yes. So I recently emailed the professor in Israel, who's one of the experts in the Rambam. I said, does anyone quote this article? Does anyone take it seriously? Because the person who wrote it is actually very serious. I can tell you afterwards who it is. I'm not going to tell you on the recording. Serious person, taken very seriously. Is this article taken seriously everywhere? Anywhere? And he said he doesn't think so. He gave me a few more makomos. I followed up on those articles and found them, and it's a joke. It's a joke. But if that's the case, how come the Rambam doesn't mention it? And the Lubavitcher Rebbe asked this question also. He doesn't really necessarily give an answer. So they say, so you see, the Lubavitcher Rebbe thought he was a Navi also, right? You can't win these types of arguments. But I think the Rambam is saying that Simcha is a requirement. And the Rambam says in the beginning of Mishnah Torah, so why did they write down the Gemara? What gave them their permission to write down the Gemara? And how come after the times of the Gemara, no one's allowed to argue on the Gemara? Because once the Gullus happened, and all the bad things happened, we're just too sad, we're wandering, we're worrying about Parnasa, we just can't focus enough to learn Torah Shebaal Peh properly. I think that applies to Nevuah also. Once we're in Gullus, we don't have that level of Simcha. Once we're worried about who's running for president and what could happen to us if the wrong person gets elected, or who's running for prime minister in some European country and what can happen to us if they win, or what's going on in Russia and China and all. We're worried about that. We can't reach that level of Simcha. And if we're outside of Eretz Yisrael, there's no level of Simcha enough that we can reach to get Nevuah. So Rav Kook, so he was part of that generation that came back to Eretz Yisrael. And he was also a Makubal, he was a holy man, he wore a shtreimel all the time in that boiling heat. They didn't have air conditioning then, it must have been holy to do that. And there seems to be evidence that he was trying to reach that level of Nevuah, because he thought, we're back. Finally, after all these years, the Gullus is over, he's back in Eretz Yisrael, he is learning Torah Shebaal Peh, Torah Shebesav in Yerushalayim, and he's trying to reach Nevuah, and he seems to be troubled in his writings. How come it's not happening? And he is a Talmud also, who tried also. How come it's not happening? And there was trouble. Because based on all that we talked about tonight, and he knew much more than we do, Nevuah should come back when the Gullus is over. So, apparently Eretz Yisrael is not yet at that level of Simcha. They're still worried about their physical safety, even in Yerushalayim, in the old city, in the new city, in Tel Aviv, they're worried. So they're not yet at that level of Simcha that we can aspire to get Nevuah, haven't returned yet. But Emir Hashem, we won't have another Tisha B'Av, and we'll be there within short time.
Why
So,
do you assume that it's associated with Simcha?
I mean the Gullus.
No, the lack of Nevuah.
Oh, well, the Rambam says you have to have Simcha.
Why do you assume that they only have a lack?
Oh, because the Rambam himself says that we're talking about Torah Shebaal Peh, that we lack Simcha. So I'm taking what he said there about why they had to write down the Torah Shebaal Peh and talking about and applying it to Nevuah, saying similarly we lack Simcha, so that's why there's no Nevuah. It's a possibility. Chanani ben Akashim Eretz Kadosh Baruch Hu Zakas Yisrael Leficha Chibur Lam Torah Mitzvot Shneimar Adonai Chavis Oman Sidko Yagdil Torah V'Yadir.